The insult struck the room like shrapnel. A colonel in his pressed blues, voice sharpened with disdain, pointed across the polished conference table and spat the words no one else dared to utter. "You don't belong here anymore. You're done flying. You had your time." The others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the man standing tall at the head of the room and the woman seated alone near the far wall. She did not flinch. Her hands, calloused from years on flight controls, remained folded calmly in her lap. But inside, something ancient and burning stirred. For 12 years she had borne their silence, their whispers, their deliberate erasure of her past. 12 years of being the ghost no one dared acknowledge. And now they thought they could bury her entirely. Her name was Alexandra Cole. To the younger officers who only knew the sanitized rosters and award boards, she was nobody. A civilian advisor with a quiet voice. A woman who kept to herself at the edges of the hangars. To those who remembered the desert air of Kandahar, the bone-rattling roar of engines, and the terror of dawn dogfights, she was something else entirely. She had been Valkyrie, the call sign whispered with awe and reverence. The only woman in her class to graduate Top Gun at the top of her cohort. The pilot who once flew an F-14 through fire so thick it blackened the canopy, bringing her wingman home on half a wing and no hydraulics. The one who disappeared after the war, leaving behind a silence heavier than metal. She sat there now, grey strands woven through dark hair, her posture soldier straight, though she had not worn a uniform in over a decade. Her eyes met no one's, but the colonel's words hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the hangar echoed faintly with the distant thunder of engines warming on the tarmac. The new generation of pilots would soon climb into cockpits. She had once known better than her own heartbeat. What none of them knew, what she had buried so deep it ached, was that she had sworn never to fly again. She had made that promise to herself at the foot of a flag-draped coffin 12 years ago. Her closest friend, her wingman, the one man who always had her six, had not come home. She had survived, and in surviving she had drowned in guilt. Every roar of afterburners since then had sounded like accusation. She walked away, but now the Air Force wanted her back. They did not ask out of respect. They demanded. A crisis had risen, a challenge that only a handful of living pilots could meet. The F-22 Raptor, America's pride, had become the stage of a looming international conflict. They needed someone who could maneuver the impossible. And when their algorithms, their simulations, and their desperate counsels all arrived at the same name, they summoned the ghost they had buried. She refused at first. Of course she did. 12 years of silence could not be undone by an order. But the colonel's sneer, the contempt in his voice, struck deeper than the command. He did not ask because he believed in her. He asked because he thought she would fail, and he wanted to watch. The others in the room said nothing. Silence thickened, cowardly and complicit. No one defended her. No one reminded the colonel who she was. It was easier to erase her, easier to stand by, and pretend that legends did not sit breathing in their presence. She rose slowly, each movement controlled, deliberate. Her chair legs scraped against the floor, and even that sound seemed to carry the weight of defiance. She met the colonel's eyes with calm stillness, a silence more cutting than any protest. And in that silence, something shifted in the room. Some of the younger officers who had never heard her story felt a ripple of unease, as if they had brushed against the edge of something vast and dangerous they could not name. 12 years earlier, Alexandra had been 29 when she strapped into her last combat mission. The desert reeked of jet fuel and sweat, the horizon a mirage of trembling heat. She and her wingman, Captain Daniel Hayes, had flown into a kill zone they were never meant to survive. Enemy fighters swarmed, their missiles screaming through the skies. At one point, Daniel's aircraft had taken a direct hit, flames streaking from its fuselage. She had refused to abandon him, diving her jet into fire and chaos, shielding him with her own craft, coaxing his crippled bird across enemy lines. She had dragged him as far as the carrier deck. But when his wheels touched down, his cockpit did not open. Smoke poured out instead. By the time they reached him, he was gone. The memory never loosened its grip. Every morning since, she woke to the acrid stench of burning fuel, the sight of his hands pounding helplessly against canopy glass. She had not spoken his name aloud in 12 years, but she carried him with her in silence, the way she carried her call sign, the way she carried the guilt. And so she had walked away, refused promotion, refused accolades, refused the gleaming promises of glory. Instead, she lived quietly, giving lectures no one listened to, consulting on manuals no one read, walking past the hangar bays like a ghost haunting the living. But now they pushed her, and something inside her shifted. She did not answer the colonel that day. She left in silence, but her steps across the hangar echoed like distant thunder, and when she returned 3 mornings later, her name was already stitched back onto a flight suit. The base buzzed with disbelief. Young pilots whispered in the mess hall. Could she even still fly? Was this a desperate stunt? Some rolled their eyes, dismissing her as relic. Others, quieter, held back, sensing something sacred stirring in the air. Her first steps into the cockpit were wordless. She traced her fingers along the canopy glass, the cool surface trembling under her touch, as if recognizing her. The F-22 waited like a beast, long-caged, sleek and restless. She slid into the seat, the harness snapping across her shoulders with a familiarity that drew blood from memory. Her hands found controls as if no time had passed. She said nothing, but in the tower, one grizzled mechanic turned away, hiding tears. Word spread quickly. Pilots who had dismissed her began to linger at the edges of her training flights, watching as she took the Raptor into the sky. She did not boast. She did not explain. She simply flew. And in the air, the silence she carried all these years became thunder. The jet obeyed her like a living extension of her will. Maneuvers considered theoretical bent to her command. Younger pilots tried to follow, but their instruments screamed in protest. She danced with gravity itself, but still the colonel sneered. He gathered others in the briefing rooms, smirking as he spoke of her failures, her past, the coffin she had walked away from. He called her washed up, a liability, a ghost chasing illusions. She listened without reply, her silence sharper than any rebuttal. The tension reached breaking point when orders came down. A hostile incursion, foreign aircraft crossing lines no one dared cross. The colonel had no choice but to send every pilot he had. But the simulations, the data, all pointed to one name, Valkyrie. The morning of the mission, she walked across the tarmac in her flight suit, helmet under her arm. Pilots who had once whispered doubts now stood at attention as she passed, their silence no longer complicit but reverent. She climbed into the cockpit as the colonel watched, lips pressed thin. He wanted her to fail. He needed her to fail. But deep in his chest, fear twisted. The sky opened before her like it had 12 years ago. As her engines roared, she felt the ghost of Daniel Hayes at her side. For the first time in over a decade, the guilt eased. She was not flying to escape the past. She was flying to honor it. The battle was brutal. Enemy jets darted like wolves across the horizon, their missiles streaking toward her squadron. One by one, her comrades faltered, pushed to the edge. But Alexandra became what she had always been, unshakable, unyielding, precise as steel. She drew far away from rookies, slicing through enemy formations with impossible grace. When her squadron faced annihilation, she pulled the impossible, an aerial maneuver thought too dangerous for human reflexes. She cut through a wall of missiles, shredding the attack, saving them all. When she landed, silence covered the tarmac. Every mechanic, every pilot, every officer stood in wordless reverence. The colonel approached, his face pale, his arrogance shattered. For a moment he tried to speak, but no words came. She looked at him, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes steady. Finally, she broke her silence with a voice low and unshakable. Respect is not given. It is earned, and it is remembered. The words rippled through the crowd like electricity. Young pilots carried them like scripture. For days, for weeks, those words lived on every tongue. Her victory was not measured in enemy craft destroyed, but in the silence that followed, the silence of respect, of awe, of overdue recognition. The same people who once erased her now stood straighter when she passed. Even the colonel, humbled, could no longer meet her gaze. And when she hung her flight suit for the final time, she did so not in shame or silence, but with the quiet satisfaction of a warrior whose truth had finally been seen. Crowds gathered at the base gates, civilians and soldiers alike, offering salutes as she walked away. She did not linger. She did not need to. Her honor spoke for itself. In the years to come, her name would be told in hushed reverence. Cadets would whisper of Valkyrie, the pilot who returned after 12 years of silence and carried the skies once more. Some stories would exaggerate, others would fade. But one truth would remain unshaken. She never needed to shout her worth. Her silence was enough. Her actions thundered louder than any words. And so for those who heard her story, a quiet reflection settled, that true strength is often silent, that sacrifice is often unseen, and that the weight of honor never rusts with time. If you are hearing this story tonight, pause and reflect. Where are you watching from? What silent battles have you carried? Share your thoughts, because stories like Alexandra's remind us of a truth that cannot be erased. Respect is earned in silence and remembered forever.